Today is May 16th, 2013. I think I got that right. We're at Science Hall at Glenville State College speaking with Dr. Joe Evans. Could you give me your full name as it is listed on your birth certificate, sir?
Yes, my full name is Johnny Joe Evans.
Okay. Have you always gone by Joe?
I have indeed.
Okay. Dr. Evans, where were you born and raised?
I was born in Glenville here, but when I was just a few months old, we moved to Weston, and so actually I consider that was where I was raised. I spent almost my entire first 17, 18 years in the Weston area.
Okay. So you went to school in Lewis County?
I did.
Okay. Is there anything you'd like to say about that? How was your schooling, or just anything at all about your young adulthood or young childhood?
Schooling was very good in Lewis County at the time. I went to elementary school in Shady Brook, which was a suburb of the Weston area. And it was a 4-room school, but we had 8 grades. And so we actually had first and second in one classroom, third and fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth. And it was only when we got up to the fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth that we actually changed classrooms. And so we had 2 teachers there, and so one of them would teach the math, science, and the other one tended to teach the literature, the English. And it really worked out well. I going on to this system because I really liked the way the system was set up, in that there were still only about 24 of us in the classroom, so there would be about half of us would be in one class and the other half would be in the other. But as I was going through the program, let's say I was in the 6th grade, but I really hadn't learned some of the aspects of the 5th grade English well enough. Frequently the teacher would reorganize us, and I would sit in with the 5th graders, and I would be able to pick up on those concepts in English that I hadn't learned. Or on the other side, if I did pretty well at math, and so a lot of times while she was working with the 5th graders, she would have me to come over, and some of the other students, all the students were treated the same, but I might go over then and sort of tutor them. So we got a lot of experience. We got a lot of reinforcement by hearing things that were happening in the younger grades. Then we had an opportunity to do a lot of tutoring. And it was interesting, a lot of teachers came out of that setting. And then from there I went to Weston High School, and I found the program there to be very, very well done.
So there was no middle school at that time?
At that time there was no middle school. Our program was grade 1 through 8 at Shady Brook, and then we had the 9-12 at the high school. Okay.
Is that the building that still stands?
No. The Shady Brook School is still there. Yes, the Shady Brook School is still there.
Okay.
I'm not sure what they've converted into now. For a while they made it into a center for young children. I think it was like a K-3 program, and I'm not sure what they're doing with that building now.
Okay.
Of course, the old high school is torn down now.
That would have been what I would have known as Robert L. Bland?
Right.
Where the Rite Aid, I think, or CVS.
One of the pharmacies is there now, but yeah, that would have been the Weston High School at the time.
Okay. What type of experiences and what could you say about your high school?
The high school was well done. Particularly, there were some aspects of it that I thought we had a real strong math program at the time. They had a real strong English program. Just one little aside here. When I was in high school, they kept putting me in the dumbed down English classes, and I was taking all of the higher level math, all the sciences, and I knew I was going to college, but apparently they didn't think I was. So the guidance counseling at that time wasn't well done. I mean, and that's not based upon who was there, but it was just at that time there wasn't very much counseling done in the schools. They only talked to us once, and that was our senior year. And I remember she called me in and she said, "What are you going to do when you graduate?" And I said, "I'm going to college." She said, "Oh, no, you're not." I said, "Yeah, I'm going to college." She said, "Well, you can't be." I said, "I'm going to college." And she said, Well, she said, we have to change your schedule then. She said, we've been putting you in these English classes that are not for those going to college. She said, why didn't you tell me? And I said, why did you never ask?
Yes.
But anyway, they switched me into an English, and I'll have to say that was the roughest experience of my life. Margaret Wells was teaching senior English at the time, and she was an excellent teacher, but I had been in the really low-track English program. They were tracking students at that time. I was in the low-track English programs, and I thought I was going to die my senior year.
Mm-hmm.
But they had a real good program. We had 3 strands. If you had a technical program, you had a classical program. Both of those were college prep. Technical meant that you were going to go into one of the STEM fields, although we didn't use that language at the time, but you'd be going into math, science. The classical program meant you were going more into the literature.
Mm-hmm.
And then they had the 3rd program, which were for students who weren't going to college. But they had a good program at that time.
So you did do exceptional. Am I being?
I did well, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Never so much based upon my ability, but probably more based upon my willingness to work and to study hard.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have done fairly well in that respect.
Okay. Where was you planning on going to college?
Glenville.
Okay.
From day one. My aunt and uncle owned what used to be the Conrad Hotel and Restaurant. I guess the hotel still carries the name Conrad, although the college now owns it. But my aunt and uncle owned that, and they had told me from the time
So Jack Conrad was your?
Jack was my cousin.
Okay, I see.
Mom and Pop Conrad, Hallie and Leland, although everybody knew them by Mom and Pop.
Mm-hmm.
But they owned that. And Mom Conrad was my mother's sister. And so she told me when I was just a toddler that I could come and stay with her and go to college. And so whenever I did graduate from Weston, I came over and began, they gave me a room in the old side of the hotel. They went through 3 different renditions down there, and she put me in, she gave me a room in the oldest part of the hotel. And I worked 4 hours every day at the hotel, or at the restaurant. I worked in the restaurant. I started out in the kitchen as a dishwasher, and then became a waiter later on.
Mm-hmm.
And so I worked 4 hours a day, and I got my board and room. And so it made coming to college very inexpensive.
Okay. That would have been early 60s?
That would have been, very early. I came to Glenville in '59, and then graduated from Glenville in '63.
Okay. And at that time, how were the degree programs structured? Were they just? Well, at that time, we began being a little more liberal, didn't we?
We were at that point we were considered to be a liberal arts college, although probably we were 95%. I'm making that number up, but we were probably 90 to 95% teacher education.
Mm-hmm.
It was very seldom that you would encounter a student who was going into anything other than teacher education.
Did you focus on a certain subject matter, or was it a broad?
Basically, you declared your major in some discipline if you were in the secondary level, and mine was in. At that time, we had one called physical science.
Mm-hmm.
We now call it today. If we were looking at the comparable program, it would be chem/physics. We still have a chemistry physics endorsement area,
Mm-hmm.
and so at that time, though, we called it physical science. But basically, it prepared you to teach chemistry and physics in the high school.
Okay. Well, what did you do after graduating from here?
Okay, after graduating, I matter of fact, my senior year was different in that the first semester, at that time, semesters were broken into 2 9-week terms, so you could take some term classes, or you could take semester-long classes. All the math, all the sciences were always semester long. English and some of the others were 9-week classes. And what you would do, you would go to school for 9 weeks, and you would attend that class all 5 days. The semester-long classes were similar to what they are now, except they were 18 weeks in length. We're now down to 15. They were 18 weeks in length, and you went to school or to class 3 days a week, unless you had a lab, and then you would do a lab on the 4th. So we had 2 different systems, but anyway, my senior year, only thing I really needed to do, I needed 6 hours of coursework, and I needed to do my internship. At that time, you didn't have to finish all your coursework. In other words, if you were close, you could go ahead and do your internship, and then you could finish your coursework later, as long as it wasn't in your major.
Uh-huh.
So the first 9 weeks, I decided I was going to do my internship the second 9 weeks of the first semester. And so one of my good friends, who was also in the physical science, had a teaching position up here at Sand Fork, but he had to do his internship first. And so for the first 9 weeks, he did his internship, and I covered his classes at Sand Fork. So I taught at Sand Fork the first 9 weeks. I didn't go to school. The second 9 weeks, I did my internship then at Burnsville at that time, and then the second semester, I decided to set out. I decided not to go to school because I had an opportunity to teach chemistry and physics down at East Fairmont. So I went to East Fairmont and taught down there, and then in the summer, I came back and finished up my.
So at that time, you were permitted to teach public school as you were enrolled in?
Yeah, basically, I had to work on a permit, but it was permissible. And so I ended up teaching for 1 semester at Fairmont East, and really had planned to stay there forever. Mm-hmm. And or however long forever would have been at that time, but I was planning to stay there. And there was a fellow named Glenn Brown, who was the superintendent of Lewis County Schools. And Glenn had been very nice to me as I was a kid growing up in Weston. He coached the baseball team, and so I played for him, and he frequently would have me to stay for lunch because my parents both worked. And so often I would have lunch with him in the summertime. And so we became real close. And so he asked me if I would come back to Weston and teach. And I told him only if I could get released from Fairmont without any hard feelings. Mm-hmm. And eventually we got that resolved, and so I ended up going back to Weston. Okay. So the summer after my senior year, then I finished up my Irish and got my certification. And then the following year, 1963-64, I started teaching in Weston High School. Okay.
Before we go any further, I'm a little bit curious about how this 9 weeks in semester thing worked. Was there certain courses that were only the semester courses and certain ones they only offered for the 9 weeks, or was it mix and match? There
was some mix and match, although not in science or math. You couldn't take a 9-week course in math or science. They were all full semester length courses. Most of the English and histories and those kind of classes were generally 9 weeks, although some of them did stretch them out into the 18 weeks. But it was pretty much by discipline. But you got 45 hours of instruction in the 9-week term. If you went the 18-week semester, you got 54 hours, and so you ended up getting more. And so the math and science always went in that direction, because even then the students tended to need more time and more help in the math and sciences. Okay.
Well, moving forward, how was your time teaching at Weston?
Enjoyed it very much. Lots of memories of things that happened during the time I was at Weston.
What grade levels?
I taught, basically they were mostly juniors and seniors at the high school. I taught 3 or 4 classes of chemistry every day, and then I have 1 class of physics. And it was a great experience. I had lots of excellent students that came through at that time. And once again, I had no intentions. I've never had any intentions of ever leaving any place. You know, I just never did. Matter of fact, I have never applied for a job in my life.
Mhm.
And so whenever I ended up somewhere else, it's because somebody else took the initiative to convince me that I needed to try. And that's how I ended up leaving Lewis County. Actually, while I was at Lewis County, while I was at Lewis County teaching, Sputnik had been launched, and there was an outcry in this nation that we needed to do something to better prepare our students in the STEM fields, the same thing we're hearing today.
Mhm.
And so a lot of money went into the National Defense Education Act. And so as a result, they offered a lot of graduate programs for basically high school teachers.
Mhm.
And the idea was to make high school teachers better. I went to school, went to Ohio State, and picked up a master's on one of those programs. And it was a great program, but unfortunately, most of us that ended up doing that left the public schools and went into the college setting. I didn't do it directly. I went back to Lewis County, and
Would that have involved a pay raise at that time in the public schools?
Yes, definitely. So there was a pay raise. Not that it was all that great, but there was a pay raise at the time by doing that. So I finished my master's, came back to Lewis County to teach, and while I was there, I had a couple of students, and one of them was a kid by the name of Ted Barker, Glenville or Weston resident. But Ted was in my class, and he left Lewis County, and when he graduated and went to WVU.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was down talking to Ted one time. I was down at Morgantown for some kind of a training program, and I went over to the residence halls and talked to Ted and some of the other kids who graduated about that time. And Ted was in engineering. And we were there, and just out of the blue, he said, you got to meet somebody. And it was one of his teachers. And so I said, sure, fine. So we started talking. And Ted was telling this guy that I really needed to get out of education and get into industry because I could make so much more money.
Mm-hmm.
And so the guy said, well, that sounds like a good idea. He said, with your credentials, I can get you lined up. He said, I'll check around. He said, one of these days you'll be hearing from me. I thought that was probably the end of the conversation.
Uh-huh.
And shortly thereafter, I got a call from Koppers Chemical in Pittsburgh, wanting to know if I'd like to come up for an interview.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ended up going up for the interview, and they offered me a position, and I ended up taking it. And so that was when I left the public schools and went into industry.
Mm-hmm.
That lasted for a year. I realized in a year how much I hated it.
Mm-hmm.
I dreaded getting up every morning and going to work. Money was phenomenal compared to what you make in education, but I just didn't get any enjoyment out of it. And so a year later then I had a chance to.
You think location had anything to do with it too?
Maybe a little bit, although I really loved Pittsburgh while I was there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any desire to go back there and live again. I do enjoy going back and visiting, but I don't have any particular interest in living there. But I think it was more just the job. I really enjoy being with the students, working with the students, and I really miss that.
Okay. So what happened next?
Well, I worked there at Pittsburgh for a year, and then during that time, I got a call from Glenville, one of my former professors, saying that there was going to be a position open here and that I ought to think about applying for it. And Frank Toth was a fellow who had called me, and he had been one of my professors. Of course, John White, Byron Turner, they were also my former professors. And they were all interested in me coming back to Glenville. So I came in for the interview, and unfortunately the bad news was Frank Toth had died in the interim. And so I really had always looked forward to working with him. I really admired him tremendously. But he died between the time he called me and the time that the interview was scheduled. And but anyway, I came back, and the president at the time, Banks Wilburn, and the president at the time told me, said, well, he said, this is just a formality. He said, he said, if you'll take it, they've already, he said, your colleagues over there in the department have already hired you. He said, but he said, I just really wanted to meet you. He said, I couldn't believe that you were as good as what they claimed you were. He said, I just wanted to check you out myself.
Uh-huh.
But anyway, I got that position then in the following fall. That would have been 1970. I started here. And then I've been here ever since.
How were those early years? I mean, the first few.
They were really excellent. I really enjoyed the staff we had at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. I mean, so many interesting things happened.
You saw a lot of your colleagues retire, I assume.
Yeah. When I first came back, they put me in office with Byron Turner.
Mm-hmm.
So we shared an office upstairs on the 4th floor, and that was really rewarding. He was a very, very knowledgeable man. He had been here for decades himself, and he just gave me a lot of help as I tried to make the transition from the public school into the college circle.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, John White was excellent. At the time, the chair would have been John Chisler. John was a phenomenal chairperson. I really learned so much from him. And John was one of those guys that he never asked his staff to do anything that he wouldn't do.
Mm-hmm.
And so if there was extra work to be done, extra demands to be made, he always put on himself first, and then the rest of us would join in. But just a phenomenal staff that we had during those early years.
Okay. So not long after you were hired, I guess the administration would have changed in, I think it would have been around mid-70s?
Yeah, I think you're right. I don't know the date there, but I would say sometime in that. It actually had been a little later than that, because in 1974, I decided I wanted to go back and work on my doctorate. Mm-hmm. And so we had at that time, we had what was called Title III development funds. And it was basically, Title III was designed to help institutions that were developing. Mm-hmm. And so part of the money we had was to help support individuals to go back to school to either pick up an advanced degree. And you could either go in the summer, or then there were a few awards that went for the entire academic year. And Banks Wilburn was the president at the time, and I went over and talked to him and told him I'd be interested in going to WVU in the summer just to check it out. I wanted to see if WVU was where I wanted to go, or if I even wanted to get a doctorate. Mm-hmm. In the early 70s, there wasn't much pressure on us having doctorates. I mean, if you had it, that was fine, but
even at other state institutions
yeah,
too?
Statewide and pretty much nationwide. If you were, now the D1, the research institutions, the big schools, they required doctorates, but the four-year colleges like Glenville across the country were very happy with people having masters. So it really wasn't something I had to have at the time. Mm-hmm. But I decided to go ahead and check it out in the summer. But while I was in the meeting with Dr. Wilburn, he said to him, he said, Joe, he said, have you thought about just going for the full year? And I said, well, I'm really not eligible. I was trying to make an excuse. We mm-hmm. just bought a home downtown. I said, I'm really not eligible. I said, because you have to have 3 years of teaching here before you're eligible to get it.
A sabbatical, I guess, would be.
It was sort of like a sabbatical, except it was set up through the funding agency. It was a requirement within the grant funding. Uh-huh. And so he said, well, he said, okay. He said, you'll have one for the summer. So I went away for the summer to WVU, and my wife and I, and we were down there going to school. And we decided to come back home during the Folk Festival. Mm-hmm. So we came back into Glenville, and I ran into Dr. Chisler. He said, Joe, he said, how's things going at Morgantown? And I said, well, I said, I'm enjoying it. He said, well, he said, I thought you must be. And I said, well, why would you say that? And he said, well, he said, I noticed where you're not going to be back in the fall, that you're going to stay at WVU and go on to school. I said, no, I'm not. I'm coming back. He said, not unless you reapply for your job. He said, they've already posted it. And he said, And I said, well, how did this happen? He said, I don't know. He said, you need to talk to Dr. Wilburn.
Mm-hmm.
So I went over to see Dr. Wilburn, and I asked him, I said, what's going on? And he said, well, I decided that you needed to have the funding so you go ahead and finish your doctorate. I said, well, that's very nice, but I said, I told you earlier I wasn't eligible. He said, I'm the president of this institution. You let me decide who's eligible and who's not. He said, I say you're eligible.
Uh-huh.
And so, if I wanted my job back, I had to reapply. It was clear they weren't going to just tear it up and reinstate it. They were going to make me reapply for the position. And so I ended up taking the grant then and continued on. Probably the best thing anyone ever did for me,
Mm-hmm.
although at the time I really wasn't happy. It wasn't what I had scheduled in my life,
Uh-huh.
but it was a good move.
Was it 100% ride?
It was, and in essence, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it certainly was poverty level compared to where I'd been. I mean, and where I'd been was almost poverty level, but I mean, the pay wasn't as good as it was if you were teaching, but
Mhm.
you could live on it,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what we did. So I mean, June did go to Morgantown. She got a job down there. She worked the entire time we were in Morgantown. We had 2 small children at the time, but
You just rented a place, I guess?
we rented a place down there and spent the next, actually, altogether, we ended up spending 2 years and 3 summers, two academic years and 3 summers down there, and finished up the doctorate.
I see. And how was your transition back to Glenville at that time?
Very smooth. Came back. John Chisler was still the chair. Banks Wilburn was still the president, so the transition there happened maybe a year or so after that. So it must have been in, I'm guessing, the late 70s when that transition occurred.
Okay.
But
So I think you were very fond of the Wilburn administration.
I was. As with every administration I worked for, I could point out some things that
Mhm.
that I feel are negative, but at the same time, there hasn't been a president that's ever done any more for me personally
Mhm.
than what Banks Wilburn did. And although at the time I wasn't really sure it was a favor,
Yeah.
when I came back and discovered I didn't have a job. But in reality, no one has ever treated me any better than he did.
Mhm.
He had good insights. He knew it was the best move at the time in my life, in my career,
Mhm.
and it really worked out well.
Okay. Well, great, great. Moving on during your period of time working here under the Simmons administration, is there anything you'd like to say during that?
There were lots of good years under the
Mhm.
Simmons administration. I think that he did a lot of good for the college.
Mhm.
He basically spearheaded if I had one thing to say that was a little bit on negative in terms of Banks Wilburn, his last 2 or 3 years he began coasting.
Mhm.
He said in more than one meeting that he was just hoping to hold the institution together until he retired.
Mhm.
He didn't want that to be his legacy, that he put a college under during his administration, during his presidency. So we had been sort of in the last couple of years of his tenure, we sort of were in a lull. We weren't doing anything bad, but we weren't doing anything to really grow. And of course, if you're not doing something to grow, you're obviously moving backwards.
Mhm.
And so when Simmons came in, he had lots of energy and lots of ideas of things we wanted to move. He probably increased our extension program more than perhaps any other administration we've ever had. Did a great job in getting an arrangement, a collaboration with at that time it was PCC, the Parkersburg Community College.
Yes.
And they've since become WVUP, but at the time they were PCC. And we had the opportunity to go down there and teach the last 2 years of their 4-year baccalaureate degree. Of course, they were community college, they were only allowed to teach the first 2 years, so they taught the first 2 years in teacher education for elementary teachers, not for the secondary where you have to have a strong curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
But, so we did the elementary program at Parkersburg. We taught the last 2 years, and that really was tremendous. Later in his career, toward the end of it, we also did the program at Summersville. Of course, in the interim, we lost the one in Parkersburg. They felt like that they wanted to be associated with a bigger university. More than once, I was told by the people down there that no way should a school located in the city of Parkersburg be getting help from a group out of Glenville.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was just, they felt like that the tail was wagging the dog, and they just didn't feel comfortable with that. And so they were looking for a bigger school. Of course, they tried to get their own university there.
At that time, everybody was encompassed under the Board of Regents.
Yes.
Okay.
And so they were trying to get their, they were trying to get a new school. The legislators were really pushing for it down there. Didn't happen, and so then they re-affiliated with WVU instead of Glenville. But that was a tremendous move. And then after that, he ended up starting the program at Summersville at the Nicholas County Center.
Mm-hmm.
And actually that one was pretty much developed, designed, built by Glenville. And so we had the Nicholas County Center, but it was totally a branch or an extension of.
And there was a center in Lewis County too. That came
There
a
was
little
a
later.
center in Lewis County. And I'm not exactly sure the order of those,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, we had one in Lewis County. It, in other words, it was not as prominent as the one in Nicholas County.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we were working within a high school there, but still it was a pretty good center.
Mm-hmm.
So he really did a tremendous job in getting extension programs, getting across the state for us, and really helped our enrollments tremendously. The thing I really liked about it was he staffed the administration of those extension programs with educators, with academics,
Mm-hmm.
and in many cases, you know, those of us on staff here were actually going to these centers to teach.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I taught at Nicholas County, I taught at PCC, and also we had programs just in high schools, like we had one in Webster County, and I would even drive to Webster County and teach courses over there. But we were actually staffing our extension courses with our full-time faculty. Which,
Okay.
Yep.
But where was the majority of the funding coming from to build these centers?
Parkersburg was already built,
Oh, yes,
so
yes.
it didn't cost any money there from our standpoint. We
Mhm.
just simply moved in. The Nicholas County Center, I'm not exactly sure what the revenue source was there on that.
Mhm.
I know we got involved in some drilling wells around that same time, and I don't know if there was some trade-off there that, I mean, it's my understanding with the wells that we supply gas to the company, and then they take that off of whatever we owe monthly for our gas charges.
Mm-hmm.
And whether some of that money was turned over to help in the building, or whether they were able to generate independent funds, I'm just not really sure.
Mhm.
where
From the
they-
legislation?
Yeah,
It was-
could have either been from legislators or from donors in the area.
Mhm.
I'm just not really sure where the money came from.
Mhm.
But I'd say probably, as far as I'm concerned, the thing that he really did during his administration would have been the creation of the off-campus centers.
What about the two times that he left to be chancellor? I mean, what did you think about that? Or acting chancellor, I guess, is what you.
Yeah, I don't think as far as him going away to serve in that capacity was really a problem. I think perhaps some of the things he learned while he was there that became a problem.
Mhm.
I think in his latter years here at Glenville, I think he became very abusive. He became very arbitrary. I think some of the things that he was able to do or did do in Charleston, that he brought those back to Glenville and implemented them. And I think he lost some of his concern and compassion for his colleagues,
Mhm.
and I think he just got to the point where he felt that he could do anything he wanted to do, and that whatever he decided was right, which does not go well in a college setting.
Just through those, his political avenues and things.
I think that was it, yeah. I think he just, and I did question, particularly on his second one, I felt like that he ought to be one or the other. I felt like that. I felt like in the first administration, first time he went to Charleston, I didn't think it was that big of a problem. The second time, I think then it really began to take away from the administration of things here on the campus itself.
Would that have been the Board of Regents at that time too, I think?
That would have been the Board of Regents, yeah.
I mean, why was the board, I mean, do you have any opinion or any thoughts? I mean, why were they pursuing him to be, why was there no one else? Why were they pulling from a college's administration?
The chancellor that had been down there, and I really don't know much about him, but I know that a lot of the presidents were not happy with his administration.
Mm-hmm.
And Simmons was one that was, and I think not only were the presidents not happy, I think several of the board members were unhappy as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think President Simmons played a very active role in getting that current chancellor ousted from his position.
Mm-hmm.
And I think then he was the household name among those on the board, because the role he had played in bringing about that ousting.
Mm-hmm.
That when they ousted him, they needed somebody to step in immediately. It wasn't a matter where you had a resignation and you had 3 months, 6 months to advertise and hire somebody, but it was something that happened pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think they just looked to him and said, would you serve in this capacity? And the first time, and I think it worked well. And he came back from that and stepped right back in, and things continued as normal.
Mm-hmm.
But then when the situation developed the next time, and I have no idea what precipitated that one,
Uh-huh.
but for some reason, Chancellor left again, and they brought him back down. And I think that was the time that he really experienced some major changes in his behavior. And of course, then he came back to Glenville, and things were pretty rocky.
Mm-hmm. I've been trying to speak with him. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. But do you think he would have preferred to stay as chancellor? I mean, what was his thinking there? I mean,
I don't really know. I don't know whether he would have wanted to have stayed on as chancellor. Often when they do this on these interim things, they put a stipulation in that you can't be, that you can't be hired into permanent position. Sometimes they don't, but frequently they do if they put you in as an interim. So, but I think he would very much have relished staying in the chancellor's position, but I don't.
so as we move further after the second time of Dr. Simmons being chancellor, you said things had somewhat changed. You think it pretty much faculty, staff, administration cooperation probably deteriorated from that point forward?
It did, seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And it just kept gaining strength across the campus, people in opposition to what he was doing. As I said, he got to the point where it was basically he was the only one that had any input. He was the only one that had any insight into what the college needed, and so he became very very arbitrary in his decision making, really alienating himself from some of his very strong supporters throughout his career here.
Mm-hmm.
But it continued to grow worse until finally the vote of no confidence by the faculty.
Mm-hmm. At that point, was there any, from what I see with records, things that were going on in the legislature, is there anything you could say that that indicated that changes were on the horizon as far as higher education as a whole during that period? Did that affect any of it, or was it just separate and two things going on? You know, the faculty and staff having problems with the administration here, and also the complete, you know, basically a mix-up of the entire education system in West Virginia was getting ready to happen. I mean, within a decade, you know, within 5-10 years.
Yeah, I don't know that they, in my opinion, they probably weren't related, because there were other cases around the state where presidents were had come under fire from their faculty and staff. So it wasn't totally unique. The thing that made this probably more unique was the fact that he had been in the chancellor's position, although in an acting capacity on 2 occasions. He had been in that position and thus had real strong support with the governing board at that time. And so, you know, for the governing board, he had done what they wanted done. You know, and so as a result, that means he was a good man, and I certainly can understand their perception. But
is that one reason you think, I mean, the news, of course, was really big at that time. It was almost daily in the Charleston Gazette. You're saying something about it, basically because of his previous stints as chancellor and it just being a big.
Yeah, I think if he hadn't have been chancellor, I don't think he would have survived near as long as he did.
Oh, I see.
I think, but he had the support of the board. They couldn't believe that he was doing these things that he was being accused of here on the campus, and they just weren't very quick to respond, and that process drug on for an incredibly long period of time.
Okay. And finally, he did resign. I guess that would have been in 1998, I think.
Yeah, I can't confirm that. He did resign. I can't agree to that. But as far as the date, I don't know exactly.
And I guess pretty much immediately, Dr. Flack would have taken over. Is that how?
Yes, that was the process that when he left, the board then appointed an interim president once again to take over until there would be time to properly advertise and select a new president.
Was there ever any thought on campus or whatnot that Dr. Flack would stay as president?
We knew from the beginning that, you know, it was stipulated when they made the appointment that he would not be eligible to apply for the full-time position. I'm not sure that the faculty and staff really believed it. At least, I don't think they accepted it. In other words, they kept hoping against hope that they would recant and that he would, but it was made clear up front that he would not be allowed.
So he had a pretty majority of faculty support.
He did. He had been here for years before. He had been on staff. He was he taught in the history department for years and years. He chaired the history department. Maybe from the time he came to Glenville, he may have been hired as a chair when he came into Glenville as well as a faculty member. Became the academic vice president and served there until he and the president had some difficulties, and the president was able to get him a position in Charleston at the Board of Regents, and so when Flack left here, he went to the board in Charleston.
I see.
And then
that's when Dr. Powell would have taken over.
And then, this was way back when Simmons was still president. Was when.
Oh, I see. So he came back from Charleston.
And so he had been in the board of regents, and so that was when when President Simmons resigned, they just took him out of the board office and assigned him up to Glenville to be the president for 1 year.
I was unaware of that. And at this exact period of time, if I'm not mistaken, or close to it, is when they actually separated the community college board. They actually separated the two boards and made the HEPC and the community and technical college. I can't even think of the term currently, but you know what I'm saying.
Yes.
Do you have anything to say about that? I mean, anything?
You know, I really don't have much thought on the separating of the board. I think, I mean, I was opposed to the board, to two boards. I think we're too small in this state to need two boards. I've heard that probably, and I wasn't here at the time, but, well, I was here as a student, but never as faculty. At one time, all education, higher and public education, was under the West Virginia Department of Education. Many of my colleagues said that was the best time that higher ed ever had.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, they decided that they needed to pull us out from the Board of Education and create a new board, which would have been the Board of Regents.
Mm-hmm.
And then,
I guess that would have been in the 60s probably.
yes.
Yes.
And then after the Board of Regents, they then, you know, as you were saying, they decided, well, gee, we need to have a board for higher ed, the college, the four-year college system, and we need to have another board for the two-year system. And I really think that we became too divided, and part of that is it doesn't give you any leverage. As I say, you know, most people claim that when we were part of the Department of Ed was when we had the best treatment we ever got. The state will listen to the Board of Education because they're powerful enough that they actually can, you know, when we talk about political decisions in the legislature, there's enough teachers and enough teacher contacts, because teachers throughout the state have contacts with the parents of all the children they teach. They really have a pretty good sized body that they can influence the vote tremendously. And so I think they really can somewhat control or manipulate the legislature. And so at that time, we got real good treatment, and there was a second factor. We were the smallest entity, and so they could give us a pay raise, and it really worked well, but it didn't affect their budget overall. I mean, that we were so small again in higher ed that it didn't take that much away from the budget.
Mm-hmm.
Then
but still recognized as needed, basically regional.
Yes.
For regional purposes.
And then finally what happened when they went to the two systems and they pulled higher ed out and left the Board of Education, the Board of Education had all the weight, and our governing board really had none. And so when it comes to working with the legislature, you know, there's not enough votes involved to really influence them in that capacity. In other words, it's going to be that the legislators have to do this because they really believe deep in their heart that this is the right thing to do. And so you don't get near the influence that you got when we were part of the Board of Education. And now that they've fractionalized us further into four-year and community, what that ends up doing, you know, you're pitting yourself against each other.
Do you think that was the purpose? Do you think
And
the
I
bigger
think
institutions were pursuing that?
I think perhaps. I think it tends, and I don't think it works well for us. I think right now, I think the public education is in the best position because of their large numbers, and then the other two groups, if they want to do something for us, they can, and if they want to ignore us, they can,
Mm-hmm.
Because we're not going to be influencing the vote tallies that much.
Mm-hmm. Another thing I noticed that was going on in the late 90s is the further development of regional community colleges. From what I understand, there was a northern, a southern in existence, and they had just merged some in the 90s and created an eastern. Did you ever give any thought or have any opinion that there was people in Charleston that were moving towards a western?
I never really thought about it. You know, all this was happening during the time when they said we had too many institutions.
Mm-hmm.
You know, every place you looked, they were saying too many institutions, we need to get rid of institutions. And at the same time, there would be political strength in an area, and all of a sudden you see a new college opened up. I don't particularly care for the way that we developed the community college system. You know, not too long before that, we developed a tremendous vocational technology program across the state, and I felt like if we were going to go into the community college route, we should have just wedded those two together and said, okay, these centers we have, like the Gilmer Calhoun, Votac, the one over in Lewis, Barber, and
Yes.
Upshur, that those should have become the sites for all the associate degree programs that were in the community college
And technical
concept.
fields, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's where they should have developed, rather than developing new entities across the state. I just felt like we didn't use the infrastructure we already had in place.
Could have been a major money saver.
Yeah, I think really, yeah, absolutely.
And moving on, well, in your career, you actually did a major change, I guess, in the late 90s. Is that, am I right to say that?
Yeah, actually, I've done a couple. When Simmons was president,
Uh-huh.
even, I became Dean of Teacher Education.
Okay.
And I served in that capacity as the dean, essentially a non-teaching role. John Chisler, who was still the chair at the time, had encouraged me to do that. He had recommended that I move into that capacity, and I stayed there. This was during the time of Bill Simmons's. While I was in the dean's office, was during the time that Bill Simmons had his second go around in Charleston,
Mm-hmm.
and he came back from that while I was in that capacity, and we had some conflicts there, and
Mm-hmm.
I ended up leaving the Department of Ed and coming back into the science math and resuming my teaching role.
Mm-hmm. Would you say you definitely preferred teaching over that administrative type role?
Definitely, and I don't ever anticipate, of course, I've never anticipated anything I've done in my life, but
Uh-huh.
I don't ever anticipate going back into administration. I really enjoy working in the classroom. And then the second one came when Bill did leave, and Bruce Flack came on.
Mm-hmm.
He interviewed a couple of us on campus to be the vice president during that interim period.
Was Peterson, had he?
Peterson was gone, and I guess he left when Simmons left,
Okay.
and so it opened up that office as well, and so Bruce came in, he talked to me, and he talked to Jim Hilgenberg, who was also a history teacher, and then he talked to the faculty around the campus, and then he asked if I would serve in that capacity. And so I moved into the vice presidency. I really enjoyed...
Provost.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And so I really enjoyed that under Bruce, and I really was... I knew he couldn't stay, but I never gave up hope that once again they would recant and allow him to stay. I think he did a lot of good to bring the campus back together and produce some harmony again between the faculty and administration.
Mm-hmm.
Simmons did a great job of unifying the faculty. I mean, everybody was against him, so probably not his plan, but
Uh-huh.
that's how it worked out.
Yeah.
And so the faculty was unified, but we were just terribly split from the administration. And so Bruce came in and did a real great job in trying to bring that back together.
Mm-hmm.
Bruce left, and so then Tom Powell comes in, and Tom asked if I would continue in that capacity as vice president, which I did. And then finally, we hired Kevin, and it created an uncomfortable situation where where I had a faculty member that was directly under me that was related.
Mm-hmm.
And so Tom Powell had really encouraged me to talk to Kevin to see if he would come on staff and join us. And he did, and been a tremendous addition, and I'm very glad we brought him on.
Mm-hmm.
But then later on, some of the faculty, particularly Jim Hilgenberg and some of his colleagues, brought to the attention of the president that I shouldn't be serving in that capacity, that the state didn't allow you to have anybody hired under you who was subordinate to you in position that was family.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so I ended up then coming back from that position into the classroom,
Mm-hmm.
and delighted I did. it's the best place to be.
Well, let's talk a little bit in depth about your time serving under Dr. Powell. But what was your first impressions?
He's a brilliant man. There's no doubt about it. Very brilliant, very aggressive, and that can be a wonderful combination, but it also can be deadly. And but Tom was really interested in academics. He really was very supportive of academic programs, and he really wanted to make us the best. I think that he and I would disagree some on what necessarily how you would make the best. But anyway, during the time he wanted to cut the hours, we had a lot of programs that were well over 128, and so under his administration we had to get everything pretty much geared back down to 128 credits, which we did. I don't particularly think that's good, although probably it turned out to be good in that now that we're being pushed to go to 120. It's obviously easier to go from 128 down to 120 than it would be if we were up at 133 or 135 or 141 and have to cut back to 120. So,
and that new drop is going to be mandated statewide?
Yes. And it's pretty much a national movement too. I mean, they're going to 120 hours. I think that's totally bogus too, but that's another topic. But anyway, Tom did attempt to do that. He attempted to eliminate some of our programs, particularly those that weren't particularly productive. We set up a good plan to do that. We put together a committee, and we actually went around and interviewed departments. We gave them a chance to first file an indication of programs they felt like they needed to eliminate, and there were programs that were suggested for the chopping block by the departments that were good moves. There were some that they didn't particularly want to eliminate, but the numbers suggested maybe we should. And so what we did then was to put together a time when our committee would go around and talk to each of the departments and say, okay, you know, if you don't want to eliminate this program, what do you think you need to do to, how are you going to get it built up? How are you going to make it stronger? How are you going to get more students enrolled? And so we had a meeting, and there were some real good, frank discussions. And so when we got finished then, after all those, we made our final recommendation to Dr. Powell as to what should be done. I was chairing that particular committee movement. There were some of the programs that didn't look good on the surface, but the faculty were interested in retaining them, and they had made strategies and made commitments as to what they wanted to do to try to salvage them. One of them was the art program. And so when our committee put together the recommendation, Dr. Powell, we suggested those programs be kept. And we put them on probation for, you know, like a 3-year period or a 5-year period where they had to prove that, you know, that they could make the changes they wanted. Dr. Powell became very angry at that. He told me in person that we had done a good job in our first recommendations or our first proposal, but that we really sucked when it came to the second, that we needed to chop those programs. And that was where I was saying we had some disagreements. I really felt like if the departments wanted to keep them, and if they were willing to make the commitment to see if they could make it happen, it was worth holding on to. Art was one of the programs that I really felt the worst about getting rid of. You know, one time art, in the fine arts department, art would have been our mainstay. Music was really the ugly duckling in the group. Music was very weak on this campus. Art was very strong during the time of Charles Scott and Jim Rogers and George Harper. And so, you know, he decided to go ahead and get rid of it, though. So he decided to get rid of the program, and of course now we're reinstituting that program.
And this was all basically because, correct me if I'm wrong, but budget cuts were really...
Budget cuts was probably, I mean, he was based it on budget cuts, but he also had this inner thing that you really ought to be good at something, and he really didn't understand small institutions, that you don't really survive because you're good at something, but you survive because you can dabble in a lot of things. I mean, you know, For example, if you can offer a science program and then on top of that, you can now build, let's say you have a chemistry degree.
Mhm.
If you can now build another degree out of that, for example, like chemistry education, then it's wise to do that in a small institution, because you'll have a few people who want to go the chemistry route, you have a few people who want to go the education. But what you have to do is make the curriculum the same, and that's what we did.
Double dip kind of thing.
Yeah, and he didn't really understand that philosophy.
Uh-huh.
But because he'd come from bigger schools where that was not an issue. But for small institutions, I think his philosophy was a little bit flawed. And so we cut some programs that I think were a mistake. But overall, I think he did a good job in terms of examining our curriculum. He was real big. He was real big in governance structure. And if anything, probably HLC found maybe he was a little too good at that, in that he perhaps created too many issues, too many steps to go through.
Mhm.
And they said that we needed to, the last time they were here, not this time, but the time before that when they were here, they said we needed to streamline that a little bit.
How about with Dr. Powell and infrastructure? Do you think he made a lot of headway in that direction?
I think his infrastructure was good. I think he did a good job in that.
In another, do you think it lagged during the Simmons? I mean, I can't really say much about Flack because he was interim and whatnot.
I'm not really sure. The thing that Powell did was he really courted the feds.
Mhm.
And we really got some good relationships going with the federal government. We got some good opportunities, with the NASA grant. So he did a real good job in courting that. Now, unfortunately, at the same time, he really alienated the state. And you may remember that was a time we went through the period where they were threatening to close us down. And
Yes.
that was pretty much because he had ticked the state off. He'd gone to the feds, he'd courted them, but he pretty much had a philosophy that the state officials were dumb. And probably compared to him, they probably were. I mean, Tom was a brilliant man, he really was.
Mhm.
But it's one thing to be smarter than your opposition, but it's another thing to be humble enough to realize that they're going to be making the votes that determine your life.
Is there any specific instances that you feel comfortable talking about that he may have done to upset the legislators or the boards or HEPC?
Not specific incidents, but there were just numerous occasions where he would make comments about them or say things to them that would imply that they were not very bright at all,
Mhm.
that we were really backwoodsy, and that the bright people were in Washington. And it was a good thing he did court Washington, because I really believe that the incident turned out would have been totally different if we hadn't had the strong support, particularly at that time, of the federal legislators. I think Robert C. Byrd probably saved our neck. I've been told, and I think it's probably true, that Robert C. Byrd told the boys in Charleston to forget it. They weren't closing Glenville. That Glenville was here to stay, and they just need to get on with their life.
Well, beyond that, I guess the saving of the institution also came with a major, amputation, which would be our community colleges.
That was part of the trade-off. I mean, I'm not sure it really saved us, but I think it was the way for them to save face. I mean, they couldn't, after all they've been threatening about Glenville, I don't think they could have just
let it be.
Just let it be. They had to do something. And so I think that the payback was, well, yeah, you can continue, but we're going to take away all your community college assets. And so they stripped us of everything at that time. We're now rebuilding some of that, but they stripped us of everything at the time.
Mhm.
But it was, and I think it was just totally out of anger. And I do know that it was right after I was told that Robert C. Byrd had been in Charleston, had talked with the legislators and told them the way things were going to be. He was extremely powerful.
Mhm.
And when he told them how things were going to be, it was soon after that I heard that we were going to survive, but that they were going to strip away our community college resources.
Do you view it as unfair to what happened to other institutions, simply like Fairmont pretty much? I mean, you can base it on regional, but they never really lost their community college, even to this day.
Yeah, and I don't know whether, I don't worry too much about whether it's, I mean, I really haven't thought much about whether it's fair or unfair. And the reason, I mean, I think we asked for it. I mean, we did some things, we alienated enough people, and people we shouldn't have alienated. I mean, you know, there was no cause for it. But I don't think Tom really thought he was being bad, but I think he basically, you know, he tended to be very honest, and he really felt that the people that he was working with were far inferior, and to him, far inferior to those who were in Washington, far inferior to those he'd worked with in the past in his other positions, his other administrations, and he was just very blatantly honest about it. And but you know, even though he may have felt like he was being honest, I think I certainly can see where they would be offended. And then when it got down to the point where they had been threatening so much that Glenville, or there was so much in the news about Glenville closing, that they had to save face somehow.
And when this had actually reached a point was actually right after he had even announced that he was leaving, from what I understand. I mean, it was about within a month. I think he announced he was leaving, and then all this came raining down. And do you think that faculty, staff, community got the wrong impression by blaming everything on Thomas Powell?
Yeah, I don't think he's to blame for everything, but I think probably I don't think it would have happened if he hadn't been at the helm. And I say that because he knew when it was time to get out. I mean, he was wise there. That was something Simmons didn't have, was the insight and the foresight to know when he needed to leave. But I think Thomas knew that. You know, as I say, I think he did some very good things, and I can say about every administration I've worked with. I think they've done some very good things, and I think they've done some things that haven't been for the best interest of the college.
But with the hurdles he was faced, do you think he did, you know, he made the best decisions that he thought were right?
Oh, I think he always made the decisions he thought was right.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think there was any question. I think, you know, I think he needed to temper some of his decisions a little bit with a little more kindness and compassion. I don't think at times he really understood, I don't think he understood the system within West Virginia. And I'm not saying that we're totally unique, but I think we are very provincial, and you just can't do the things he did, say the things that he...
Just his administration, what you're saying, it basically would have went a lot smoother had he not alienated so many individuals.
Oh, I think if he hadn't alienated, and essentially it's the state legislators and the governing board. I mean, if he hadn't alienated those, I think he would have had a pretty smooth administration statewide. Now, on campus, he tended to be very, very crude to some people. I mean, he could be extremely harsh. You know, and probably, I know a lot of people would have been offended by some of the things he said of me. I just sort of, I mean, I just laughed at him. I mean, you know, just because we disagree doesn't make him right and me wrong, or vice versa, you know, and I've always held that philosophy, so, but he had lots of great strengths as an administrator, but probably some of his people skill would have been his weakest.
Okay, and would Dr. Freeman, would he have been hired on as your replacement, I guess?
Yes.
Okay. What was your first impressions of Dr. Freeman?
My first impression when he came in as vice president, and there were some changes made with we went to the super chairs, so we only had 2 chairs for all the departments, and they were clustered or grouped. There was some decisions being made. At that time, our super chair was a biology professor, and he had decided that it would be good to get rid of chemistry, physics out the science program so they could focus more on biology. And we were totally at odds over that because, you know, it wasn't going to save us anything again. I said, well, you know, we only had one biology teacher or one chemistry teacher at the time, and I said, what do you plan to fire the chemistry teachers? Well, no, he said, we have to have the freshman chemistry level. I said, then what are you going to gain by getting rid of the chemistry program? But anyway, he sold that to when our new provost came in, he sold that to him. He sold that to Freeman. And so Freeman got on that move. You know, he began supporting that initiative. And so we got off to a bad start. I mean, we were in opposition. We were at odds from the get-go. And so probably during the time he was vice president, we probably had more conflicts than what I would like to have had. But then once he became president, we had a tremendous relationship.
Do you think he was able to, seeing how that it was somewhat obvious, I guess it wasn't obvious, but I guess it was obvious in the fact that he was going to take over the reins at least for a short period of time, right as all the stuff was happening about potential closure and then the loss of extension offices. Do you think just his personality and things were able to, this is what I've heard from other individuals, was able to mend fences in all directions, even
Absolutely.
with state legislature and...
Freeman was really, I mean, at the time when he was, and of course when you're provost, you're not really your own man. You know, you're number two, and the idea is that you're to be basically loyal and supportive of the president, and move his initiatives through. And so a lot of times those initiatives conflict with what you want to do. So I'm not sure that a lot of the problems I had with Freeman personally, and some of our other staff did too, the problems we had with him, I'm not sure it was because of his agenda, or it was because of an agenda that he was pushing because of Tom Powell. But
so basically we're saying, I mean, we may have got Tom Powell at the right time, but he definitely left at the right time.
yes, definitely. I think if he would have stayed any longer, we would have been in horrible shape. But I think he did some good things to bring us on. He got the federal money, he got the federal support, he got the building projects going, you know, the renovation of the science hall. All these didn't come to fruition while he was still here, but obviously this building was under renovation. The renovation of the Robert Mollahan Center over here. Although we hadn't gotten started on, he did the building project, the housing out of Pioneer Village.
Library.
And the library. So all those things, you know, came about under his leadership, and a lot of that was federally supported. Some of it didn't come, you know, they had the initiative to begin the building of the, they'd already started the discussion under Tom Powell to build the new Coliseum out there that's now going up on Mineral Road. There had been talk about renovating and putting new windows in. So all those projects basically were being discussed at the time Tom was here. I think probably, you know, as I said, I think the biggest legacy that Simmons left would have been the extension program, which unfortunately Tom pretty much demolished during his tenure here, but nevertheless, that would have been Bill Simmons' legacy. And I think Tom Powell's legacy would be the building project, and as you were mentioning earlier, the infrastructure.
Do you think that, I mean, did Dr. Powell believe that the extension offices were important? I mean, he wouldn't have gotten rid of them otherwise, would he?
He wouldn't have gotten rid of them, but it was just because of some of the mistakes, in my opinion, that he made in dealing with people, and for them to save face, that was about the only thing they could do to us. And so,
but they did it statewide. I mean, at least they made it appear like it was statewide.
In theory, although they really did it, they really put the hammer on us as far as our extension program. I mean, as you said, Fairmont, although theirs is separated, they still in essence have it. But that came after we had already been told what was going to happen to us. You know, they had already been that that they were pulling everything out from under us. The only thing we were going to be was this little island.
And they had to make it legal, I guess. So.
Yes, and then they had to find, so then they just made it a statewide initiative. But you know, yeah, I lost the train of thought there. I was going somewhere.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay, but I'd lost it there. But there was something that I was thinking along those lines. Maybe it'll come back later.
Well, what else can you say about the Freeman administration? I mean, it wasn't real long, but...
Freeman did, it was phenomenal what he did in his short time. He brought the faculty back together. He brought the faculty and staff back together. You know, it really, everything just almost became harmonious again. We didn't do anything phenomenal during the time. I mean, I can't, you know, let's say, of course, he had a very short tenure, but if he has a legacy, it's the fact that he restored harmony on the campus and restored harmony statewide.
Mm-hmm.
Under his administration, it became, you know, he didn't stop things. You know, the building projects continued, and he was good in some of those discussions involving some of those building projects. He and I became, I felt, quite close during the time he was president. All of the ill feelings we had were mended. I really enjoyed working with him. I would over talk to him on many occasions, and we would get to the point where one of us would say to the other one, you know, if I was sitting on that side of the table, I would be saying the same thing you are.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'd had some experiences on the administrative side as well as the faculty. He had experiences on both sides, so we could sit there and we could talk from the perspective, you know, yeah, if I was president today or vice president, I could see where you're coming from. Mm-hmm. And it just really made, he really did just a tremendous job of restoring harmony and so that's one of the reasons why I don't think that some of the things that happened early on when he was provost was really of his own decisions, but I think they were things that were being pushed by the president at the
Mm-hmm.
time.
Okay. Well, moving a little bit forward to, I guess it would be our current administration. It's a little bit more difficult to look back on something that's not even over yet, but what would you like to say about the Barr administration, the initial coming on and furthermore until now?
I think that his legacy will be what he has done to develop to continue development of our infrastructure. Mm-hmm. I mean, you know, that has certainly been strong. We've seen a lot of good moves. I hope that we're not getting ourselves into a financial crisis. I mean, one always hopes that, but I have no idea of the money flow. But I mean, when you look at all the things that are happening with the building of Goodwin Hall, the building of the new Coliseum, the renovation of the building up here, you know, those are tremendous accomplishments. Mm-hmm. And one can only hope that there's the resources available to support those decisions.
That those new things actually do what they're meant to do and
yes.
pull in
the additional revenue as we continue on through. But when you look then at the, I mean, where I really see he has really excelled and where I think he really deserves a lot of credit is when you look downtown at the Better Business Bureau, as you look on down Route 5 to the complex down there where the Morse Center, where they're training all the people basically in the criminal justice fields. Mm-hmm. The hotel, I'm not really sure, you know, obviously we own that, but I'm not really sure what to make of that at this point. Mm-hmm. But I mean, he's done a lot of things that really, in my opinion, have extended our outreach beyond the academic program. I think, you know, through from all the administrations, from Banks Wilburn, Bill Simmons, Tom Powell, Freeman, you know, everything was basically college program and our campus outreach, but always academic outreach. You know, they were offering academic offerings at the various community colleges or what have you. But here I see us moving into a totally new venue as we look toward building the Morse Center and our input into the criminal justice realms. The Better Business Bureau downtown, we did have one earlier under one of the other administrations, but it was located in Braxton County up at Flatwoods. So I think that's going to be his legacy when he leaves.
Have we seen an expansion of any programs during his administration?
We've brought back a few of the programs, academic programs. You know, art's coming back, and there have been a few others. I don't think he's been nearly, and maybe it's because we already had a pretty large and a fairly solid academic program. Maybe, you know, as you tweak it, you're not going to notice the changes you do when you go into a totally new venue like opening up the Morris Center. And so I think that's going to be, so I don't know. I think he's done some things in the academic realm, and maybe we'll see more of it as we look back at it 10, 15 years from now. But I think most of his has been in the outreach area.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the foundation has grown some. I mean,
The foundation has definitely grown, and that got a start under Tom Paligan. He began working toward the foundations. Once again, Freeman didn't probably do anything that would really stimulate anything much, nor did he do anything that would detract from it much. You know, he was basically just trying to restore harmony. But I think Tom started it, and I think Pete has done a good job at continuing to move that.
Would your opinion like the Hidden Promise thing that's going on? Do you think that's a good?
I think the Hidden Promise has turned out to be a good initiative. Yeah, I definitely would cite that as something that I think is very positive. My biggest concern, I guess, I have with the administration at the present time is the fact that all academic programs don't fall under the academic office, and I think that's a real mistake. I think,
and that's just recently.
And that's recently, yeah. And I worry about the integrity of the programs when they're not being overseen. Babe, when I think of outreach, I think of trying to basically expand resources. And I may have a rather narrow view of that, but I basically think of that office as trying to expand resources and opportunities to get resources. And often that can be at odds with academics.
Do you think that legislature has any play in that, or do you think that's all those decisions have been made on campus?
As far as I know, they're basically being made locally. I don't know that for a fact because I really don't know what's going on. I'm pretty much out of the loop now since the last time I had really any involvement when I would have been in the position of the ACF representative and also on the governing board, which Paul Peck's doing now. And at that time, I kept pretty close with what was happening in the legislature, but I'm further from that now, so I'm not really sure what's there. But I think it's probably a local decision made. And I think part of it is that we can definitely generate more revenue, and we'll have more students coming in if we let outreach handle it, because I'm not sure that they will have the same academic integrity requirements. And that gives us some issue. It does concern me.
All right. Well, in ending, is there anything that else you'd like to say before we end, and about the college, about your career, life, anything?
It's all been good. Even during the time we were having our greatest struggles with Bill Simmons, that probably would have been the most negative of all of my times in academic, but yet I found tremendous enjoyment in all of it. And I had my life to live over again. I wouldn't do anything particularly different. When you look at what has happened, I think a lot of good things have happened. I think there have been our share of bad decisions made and bad things have happened, but so far we've had the endurance to be able to hang in there and see it through to the end.
All right. Well, Dr. Evans, I want to thank you for your time to do this interview, and I especially want to thank you for your service to our institution.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you.